Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Writers and Fighters, the podcast featuring interviews with authors of all kinds, as well as people involved in combat sports. I'm your host, AJ Ortega, and today, in episode 3, I have a conversation with Nate Jolly, a former independent pro wrestler and current bodybuilder. We talk about his work ethic, his start in pro wrestling, his transition into bodybuilding. We talk about mental wellness and setting goals and achieving them. It's a good conversation, and it's a peek into the world of somebody shifting gears from one very physical endeavor into a new physical fitness endeavor. And so I think it's a really, really good, eye-opening conversation, easy, light conversation, and you can keep up with Nathan online, and we'll have all that information there for you in the show notes and the end of the podcast. But before we get to that interview, I like to start with a little bit of fight talk, and but even before that, go and follow the podcast on Twitter and subscribe on YouTube. We're killing it on Facebook and Instagram, but help me get those numbers up for Twitter and YouTube, and I'll keep bringing you that quality content. Go in there, type into the search bar, Writers and Fighters, in either of those platforms, the YouTube or Twitter, and it'll come up there, right? You know how to use the search bar. We're sharp. It takes just a minute, and it really helps us out, gets the word out there, and it really warms my cranky black heart. So I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I was reading online. I was reading that the UFC, the MMA promotion, the biggest MMA promotion in the world, they agreed to donate money for CTE research to the tune of $1 million over about 5 years. And that's it sounds like a lot, but it's also the UFC and something that does affect their sport. And I think as time goes on, we're going to figure out exactly how much it does affect this sport, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the CTE, the damage you get from your brain from impacts to the head, right? We know this conversation, those of y'all that are football fans, right? Will Smith movie and all that stuff. So the Cleveland Clinic's Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health in Las Vegas has been working on the professional athlete's brain health study for 10 years, and the UFC's been tied into that for quite a bit of time. And they're trying to figure out how they can tell who's at higher risk of developing that CTE. And there's more than 100 UFC fighters that, they're part of the study, and they're taking their data and test results, and they've put together, between 20 and 30 peer-reviewed articles and stuff. So the data is coming out. It is they are getting data from it and reaching some sort of conclusions. The data, they want to use it to help with regulation and policy in approving fighters for combat, again, at that highest level. So if they can develop some sort of test or screening that could determine if a fighter has a high risk of CTE, then that's something that they can figure out in terms of licensing athletes, right? You got to be able to pass physicals and all sorts of other medical stuff, check your heart and all that stuff. But now they're going to start checking people's brains. Or at least that's the long-term goal of a big project like this, a study that's been going on for 10 years. And again, in a very young sport. Football's an older sport as far as our country goes, but mixed martial arts is pretty new in terms of being organized and regulated and having some sort of governing body. And so they're getting numbers from boxers as well. They have data from men and women. They did find that boxers perform more poorly on cognitive tests than their peers in the MMA world. And again, I think it's obvious there because boxing is all just the striking, whereas in the UFC you have other things like grappling, that there's other ways to absorb punishment in the world of MMA. So I think when if you look at some of that data, some of it is to be expected, but I'm sure they're going to discover all sorts of stuff and hopefully make it safer for folks. And so they're testing certain levels of certain proteins from injured brain fibers. You can do that with like simple blood tests. It's all really interesting work. The reason I bring this up is because, the UFC has an interest in this because their fighters do take repeated head trauma. And Max Holloway, again, who I mentioned on the last podcast, Max Holloway is fighting on the 16th on ABC, the UFC on ABC event, and he sure takes a lot of damage in fights. I saw on Twitter that someone had added up the significant head strikes that he absorbed, right? And so, at the end of a fight, they say, oh, there was this many significant head strikes, there was this many takedown attempts, they break down the numbers. And so somebody had gotten the numbers of how many significant head strikes he absorbed, not that he delivered, that he absorbed, and it was like over 900. It was almost 1,000. 1,000 impacts to the head. Not all of them concussive, of course, not all of them resulting in a concussion, but some, a handful, a lot. And I think Max Holloway's in his late 20s. He's not up there in age. There's UFC fighters getting up to 40, right? And even in an interview, I was listening to Max Holloway in an interview with ESPN, and he was saying for this camp, he's not sparring. He's not sparring in this camp. You take damage in sparring, right? Particularly hard sparring sessions. And some people would argue that maybe more so because you have the headgear on, right? Which gives you this illusion that maybe you can take more impact, but your brain's still under there, right? Under that padding. And so it seems like Max Holloway is aware of the damage he's taken in his career, particularly in the last couple years. And even in the interview, kind of lightheartedly, but again, because he's a very likable, kind of jovial person, he said he was trying to save his brain to help his kid with third grade math. And so he wraps it up in this thing that okay, well, I have to be a dad and I need to stay sharp to help my kid with his homework. But there's a reality in that. He has to consider certain things down the road. And I don't think he has any delusions about those kinds of possibilities. He spoke very openly about it. And so that brings up stuff like the Floyd Mayweather conversation. And here's the thing, whenever people start talking about Floyd Mayweather, who I don't like personally, not that I know him or anything, but not a likable character, right? But he's going to be sharp in his old age. He's going to be sharp in his old age. In his career, he got a lot of flack, and still does, about being a boring fighter. And that's about true. Lots of his fights are not particularly exciting. He took very few chances, especially in the latter part of his career, with sticking his head out there and taking those strikes to the head that are going to result in a CTE. That Philly shell defensive stance, being a counterpuncher, utilizing speed over power, was never really a knockout artist. Early in his career had issues with breaking his hands, but find someone faster. Find somebody faster that can throw 3 jabs in a second. And so when people would say he just runs, I'm like, yeah, he's running away from getting brain trauma. Yeah, he's playing a smart fight, even if not an entertaining one. But, again, the highest grossing pay-per-view box office draw ever. And so that's why he's going to be sharp as a tack when he's 80. He's going to be around for a long time, and he's going to be sharp, and he's going to be making money the whole time. And, my hope is that he takes care of the young guys coming up, gives them the right boxing and business advice, Again, we've seen the results of some, football players, particularly because it's been around longer, so we can see the CTE at the end and then also get the confirmation. Because CTE, you can't confirm it until after death. It's a post-mortem diagnosis, right? In the medical world, I believe it's they have symptoms that would indicate CTE, right? But they can't say, oh, you have CTE. That they have to look at the brain. And so it's a hard conversation. The CTE conversation is a hard one. And I know that the football fans listening know that because they keep up with retired football stars. I think about boxers and UFC fighters that are, still around, but you hear them talk and, they slur their speech a little bit. It's not like their bodies betrayed them to the point of the Muhammad Ali level, right? With the pugilistic Parkinson's resulting from the head trauma. But the shaky voice, right, the real bad depressive episodes and things like that. So we're aware that stuff exists, and so there are organizations out there studying this stuff at length. So I was just thinking about that because I was saying how exciting that fight with Max Holloway is going to be. But why are his fights exciting? Well, because he delivers a lot of damage and he takes a lot of damage, and it looks exciting on the screen. But, what does that look like 10, 15, 20 years down the road? Yeah, that'll bring down our mood. So let's bring the mood back up and listen to the interview with Nate Jolly, former pro wrestler and current bodybuilder. So I hope you enjoy this interview. All right, everybody. This is the interview portion, and I'm sitting here screen to screen with Nathan Jolly, somebody I have a little bit of a history with, and we've touched base throughout his career and so on. And so welcome aboard, Nathan. I appreciate you saying yes to this. Tell everybody who you are and what you do right now.
I am currently, again, thank you for that introduction, man. I really appreciate that. What I am right now is I am a self-made man, an entrepreneur, a man with goals, a guy who has set out to accomplish any type of endeavor that's in front of me. I am currently an amateur bodybuilder for the NPC, Classic Physique Division. I'm also a former and happily retired professional wrestler. That's kind of my background right there. I take a lot after my dad. My dad started a machine shop out of a garage and built it what it is today. My dad is somebody that I've always looked up to and inspired to be as far as self-made, accomplishing and building everything on your own. All the things and goals that I have done in my life have been through a vision of just myself and, with the willpower and workhorse ethic that I carry with me. To accomplish these things, such as I did in professional wrestling and now in my new endeavor with bodybuilding. So that's a little bit of a background to where I am.
That's awesome, dude. And me being again, like I had a similar vision of my father in that, I get the work ethic from that. That's like the best thing I inherited, right? It's invaluable. So I like that story. I love that story, and that, like, again, something, and again, I just, me, I respect the people that work with their hands and the machine shop thing. Just hearing that, I didn't know that was your dad's background. That's really, really awesome. But to see that and then have it, internalize that and transfer it into something so not a machine shop, like pro wrestling or bodybuilding and so on. And so let's go back to little Nathan. So what was, like, you growing up, right? And so eventually you get into pro wrestling. So did you watch growing up? What were the things you did, like, as a kid that maybe influenced that?
So my childhood was, man, I grew up like a super, like, skinny kid, really into, like, video games and anime and cartoons and all that stuff. I got into pro wrestling when I was in 5th grade, man. It's a funny story. A lot of people, their basic usual story is they come across it on TV and they're just like, oh, what is this? This is absolutely amazing, and they get hooked. Mine was a bit different that way. I remember being in 5th grade, one of my friends had brought a Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine to school. And I started, like, reading it and going through it and seeing all, like, these different various characters, and I was just like, whoa, what is this? This is, like, real life comic book heroes. Like, I gotta check this out. So, like, after browsing that magazine throughout class, I decided, okay, well, I'll try to figure out some way to watch it, because I've came across wrestling when I was, like, really young throughout the TV and stuff, and I just never really paid attention to it. Obviously, like, I would get, like, boxing and wrestling mixed up all the time. Like, I didn't know which one was which. I just knew they were in a ring with lights and stuff. So I would come across it when I was, like, very young, but it just never really interested me until I opened that magazine. And after that, I did everything. I did my research as to where I could watch wrestling when it comes on. And I would just remember I was browsing a Friday night, and I finally found it. I'll never forget the match either. It was Batista and Rey Mysterio in a steel cage match against Johnny Mercury and Johnny Nitro, Eminem with Melina.
Sure.
And I remember just watching that night, and like literally it just sunk its fangs into me, man. And I was absolutely hooked from the get-go. And I stayed watching wrestling throughout all of middle school, all of high school. which eventually led to my senior year. I decided like I was going to be a professional wrestler, and for whatever reason, everyone around me was just like, no way, that's never going to happen. Like I grew up in a really small town, Ingleside, Texas, which is just a really tiny town outside of Corpus. And so for me to come out and say that, I'm going to be a professional wrestler one day was just so bizarre to people. And a lot of people just did not understand it, and they never saw it happening. And so I eventually made the first initial step. I went to a little wrestling school down in Mission, Texas, right outside the border, man. And I would like stay religiously every single weekend, and I would train under my trainer, Cherry Ramones. Danny Ramones, I do owe him a lot, and I trained under him every single weekend for at least 7 months. And then I eventually had my first debut match in a flea market in front of 30 people getting paid $20. And that is how my journey began, and it's basically just been a history book ever since then.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a really cool one. Yeah. And so when you started, when you said, "Hey, I'm gonna do this," you were a senior in high school. At that point, you said you grew up like a skinny kid and stuff, right? And so, at what point did you adjust that physical part of or were you an athlete before, but just a thin athlete?
So I was telling somebody this the other day, actually. I was never an athlete growing up. I did play football when I was in second grade, but that lasted about 2 days because I kept getting mowed over by this fairly large human being that just mowed me over every time we made a play. And I just told my dad, yeah, I can't do this. Like, I'm just, this hurts. And that was like my first taste of like any type of sports. And that was the only, other than that, I played 0 sports in high school. When I was 16, I decided, like if I have any chance of wanting to pursue professional wrestling, I need to look like a professional wrestler. So I asked my dad for a little bench press and dumbbell set up, and a jar of protein for my 16th birthday. And when I started doing that, that's when I really got heavily into like weightlifting and bodybuilding and improving the physique. And honestly, I want to say that was probably the best decision I did, because I broke into wrestling with already a well-rounded physique, and people were like really took a liking to that. And they noticed, like he doesn't have a lot of whole wrestling experience, but he has a really good look to him. And that helped me out tremendously throughout my career. So that was like a head start on everything. So the immediate thought of having a dream of doing it, I immediately jumped on it and started pursuing it at the age of 16. So that's kind of where everything basically started for me, and I was able to like transform my physique. And I really like religiously follow like bodybuilding like legends and rules and formulas throughout my entire wrestling career, which just helped me,
Yeah, I remember you again, because we ran into each other at a few shows that we were. I was working as a ref. You were working as a talent, and so on. And so, I remember you being young in your career, and again, getting opportunities because of like, oh well, look, I have this look, and I am trained appropriately, and all this stuff. And so you're able to grab those opportunities rather than let them go to other people. I mean, that's the way it goes. It's just like, I mean, the wrestling world and the world in general, ain't nobody giving you anything, right? You gotta go take something, and so I saw that.
Absolutely.
And that, there's a difference there that I think served you well, because I keep up with your career and social media and so on, and would see you having some really for independent wrestling some pretty big opportunities, So for you, is there any one of those like opportunities, a match, some kind of program you did, or a promotion you worked with, or that sticks out that was like, oh man, I'm really doing this now, right? Like, I think you're 100% legit once you do that show in front of 20 people. Like I've refereed those shows. It's so odd, but like you're doing it. But like once you're like, man, I think I might be making it now. Like when did that happen? You had to have contextualized that at some point. So
we're probably talking about a point in my career when I started hitting what we call a stride, is when things start making sense, things start to click. There's been plenty of times where I really felt like I was getting somewhere with this wrestling. Is from the time I would look at a calendar and I would see, man, I got Friday, Saturday, Sunday booked up every weekend for the next 4-5 months. that was like the first, okay, well, I'm actually like getting somewhere with this, and I'm making money doing this, and I'm gone traveling every weekend. That was probably my absolute like thing that made me feel like, okay, well, we're getting somewhere with this. But then I also had gotten some like once in a life opportunities, as you probably remember. Like I had a hair versus hair match versus Billy Gunn. I got my head shaved by Billy Gunn, and I look back on that all the time, and I'm like, dude, I grew up watching that guy, and that guy straight up shaved my head. Like I got to wrestle that guy, and he straight up like shaved my head. Like it was just, it's so bizarre to like think about it and look back on it. And sometimes I do watch like old highlight videos of that, and it's something I can like look back on and be absolutely proud with. You know, stuff like that really made me feel like, okay, well, I'm getting these huge opportunities. And then probably my biggest opportunity that I was given in my wrestling career was main eventing Gulf Coast Wrestling Alliance against AEW's Sean Spears, because that company 100% truly believed in me, what I could do, and what I could bring to the table. And as far as I know, I'm the only like guy in Texas that ever like got to wrestle him, you know. And it was just a complete honor. It was in my hometown here in Corpus. Everybody showed up for that one, you know, like my family, my friends, my coworkers, like everybody and anybody showed up. And that was probably my proudest moment in wrestling. That made me feel like, you know, okay, maybe I am as good as I hope to be, you know. And that's where I started hitting that stride of, you know, filling up weekends and feeling more confident in my career. A lot of times in my career, I felt very insecure. I felt not worthy. I always felt really not good enough. And the whole confidence thing was a really hard and tough part for me to eventually gain. But once I started getting that ball rolling and that momentum going, things started picking up and started looking pretty good for me.
That's great. That's great. Seeing you get those successes and now you have these artifacts you can look back at and be happy and proud about. That's great. But you did allude to like maybe the tougher part of doing what you did, and hard endeavors come with rejections and failures and self-confidence issues and things like this. And it's one of those things that you and I have talked privately about, but that also you've talk about publicly on social media and stuff like that, which I think is awesome and brave and stuff like that. So what about the low stuff and maybe a mental and emotional fatigue that this stuff takes, and how does that, you know, mental and emotional wellness tie into fitness and stuff like that?
I mean, I don't want to say pro wrestling was damaging, but in a sense that it was physically, it was. My body was like severely like beat up this January, man, which eventually led to everything coming to a halt. This January, I had blew out my knee at a show, and that was like, you know, that was the first start of the new year, and I had already blew my knee out. Like that was like pretty shitty, man, and that put me like in a mental state. And that put me pretty bad. Like I was like stuck in my apartment for 2 weeks. I couldn't leave. I couldn't walk down the stairs. Like my left knee was like a fucking bowling ball, man. Apologize on my language part.
Oh no, we're explicit here. We can say whatever we want. Shit.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. My left knee looked like a bowling ball, like black and blue. And that really just put me in a bad mental slump. And a lot of things with wrestling is you get more no's and you get yeses, and that is just a hard reality you have to accept. You got to have tough skin for that. There would be times when I would send out full resumes, highlight packages, references, and it would just be left unseen or just simply told a no. So there's a lot of rejection that comes with pro wrestling, but when you do get those yeses, they mean more than anything, and it's a real good kickstart. But the one thing that did help me the most is no matter what I had going on, no matter what rejections or things that didn't work out or pander out, like I always had the gym to rely on, and that was my outlet for stress, emotion, depression, any type of mental slump that I found myself in. I was like, you know what, this company told me no, but it's okay. I'm going to go to the gym and everything's going to be okay. So that physical fitness part of my life actually did so much, and I leaned on it like a crutch throughout my entire life, no matter what I was going through, like especially with wrestling and self-doubt and self-worth, which was a constant battle. Like I always had the gym to like make me feel, at whole and at peace, so that fitness part of my life is what kept me in my mental state up and up.
No, that's awesome. That's great. And again, that you have these things that, being fit serves you to be a wrestler. Being fit serves you to be a bodybuilder and so on. I like that you mentioned the fact that rejection is part of the deal, right?
Hmm.
I shared with you recently. I was like, oh yeah, I got some, a couple more poems picked up, and this publication coming out. I was like, yeah, but I got a collection of rejection letters, and yeah, they used to kind of get to me. Now I'm like, fuck it, bring them.
Yeah.
Bring them, because then once I get one, I'm like, now I got to slam dunk it, and if you're good and you're honest with yourself, you will, right? You will break through and get past those rejections, get to the point to where they matter less. They're not indicative of who we are as people or our character, but it's just like, okay, well, it's not the place for my shit, and so I take it elsewhere, right? I don't work it.
You gotta let the rejection in the nose fuel you to get those yeses.
Exactly. And so the injury you mentioned, and then is that what led to you focusing on the bodybuilding rather than the pro wrestling and the ring stuff?
Oh man, that is a great question actually, because I still have not figured out the best way I tell people about this. And actually last week somebody had asked me like, what caused it? What was it? And honestly, everybody like wants to know. Like that's everybody's biggest question is what made me quit wrestling. Of course, let's start off with January. I blew my knee out, which took about 4 or 5 weeks to recover, and my knee still has not been the same. During that point, I had to realize, like, man, what happens if this was 10 times worse? What if I had tore something and I was out for 6 months? What have I done? Would I have been able to take care of myself? Would I have been able to pay my bills? Like, that stuff really had me worrying about what I need to do as an actual career. So that was like my first like stint of self-doubt and quite possibly like quitting at the moment. But luckily I did recover that knee. I got back up on my feet, and then I started rolling again with the full schedule. I started traveling a lot in February. And I had, we talk about all the no's, right? All the no's that we got. Well, this year I had a lot of yeses actually. I had a full lined up schedule from February all the way till maybe like early June, maybe early June, kind of some stuff in July. I had every weekend filled. I had some opportunities. I got to do extra work with AEW in February. Actually, I got called up to do that. So I had a lot of good things going for me, man. I had a lot of steam and momentum. I had plenty of opportunity coming, right? So March hits. As we know, the pandemic hits as well. Everything that I had busted my ass for and worked for was literally up in smoke, gone, no question. No shows, gym shut down, and literally all I had was my real job, and that was it. I literally watched all my bookings I have just up in smoke and vanish, and that killed me. It literally killed me. It put me in such a bad mental state to the point where I was just like, what is this? I was home every weekend. I didn't understand what was going on. As weeks went by, I realized I had never stepped foot in a ring. I have not traveled. I have not done anything. I just felt so like I just didn't know how to feel or how to act or do anything. I just felt so lost at this point in my life. And as time went by, I needed to figure out what I needed to do because the fire and passion that I had for wrestling was burning out by every weekend. So I finally tried to figure something out to take away from the time, something to work towards, something to take my mind off of that, man. I was just severely heartbroken over that. So I looked into possibly get ready to compete in my first bodybuilding show. So I started doing contest prep as soon as the gyms opened, which was May 18th. I'll never forget that day. I could not sleep that night. May 18th is when I started my contest prep for my first show. And once I got in the groove and the grind of getting ready to compete, man, that completely just took my mind off everything that was happening in my life, in the world. All I had was just this goal to work towards every single day. And at that point, I was so into it. I was just like I was like a machine, man. Like I just ate, slept, and trained, and that's all I really did for about a good 4 months. I believe my contest prep was about 15 weeks actually. So those 15 weeks, I ate and slept like a bodybuilder, and that really like asserted my passion and fire from one sport to another. And then eventually I got to finally step on stage and compete. I took first place in my first show. After that, it was done. I was completely hooked on bodybuilding. And after that, like I remember getting off that stage and be like, maybe this is what I should have been doing this entire time. The amount of self-worth, accomplishment, success, emotion, I had such a mental high. It lasted for a week. And for a week, I had felt absolutely incredible about myself, man. And I had never had a feeling like that before. And so after that, I was kind of hooked. And I had to sit down and realize with myself, like, as much as it hurts saying, like, I had zero passion for wrestling. Like, that fire was gone, and another fire was lit for another endeavor. And it just happens to be this bodybuilding journey that I'm on. And so that's kind of basically where pro wrestling halted for me completely, and I just kind of transitioned over to this new sport.
No, yeah. Again, I what I think is the success of that is that, okay, well, the wrestling stuff is over. There was a finite amount of time you belonged in that environment and so on. Did exactly what you needed to do, and then that energy went elsewhere. Like if that energy disappeared and dissipated, and then you became like, I don't know, a lazy, not goal-oriented person, then that'd be like a problem. I'd be like, oh, what's Nate going? Oh, no, well, no, now he's all in over here with the bodybuilding thing. And so maybe tell somebody like me who doesn't know about that stuff, about bodybuilding. So you said you're amateur. I've heard about NPC before. Like, how does the amateur level and maybe regional stuff, and like, how does that, what's the hierarchy really, I guess, you know, like who are these organizations and things like that maybe?
So the NPC is basically just like a step down from the IFBB. IFBB is like absolute top level, pro level, and that's the goal, is to eventually like turn pro.
Okay.
So in order to do that, this next show that I am competing at, that I'm getting ready for, I would either need to take top 2 in an open class, which qualifies me for a national show. Then I go to a national show, and I believe it's either top 2 there, and then you like earn your pro card from there. And then from there, that's when you start competing in top level pro shows, which is obviously the goal. But that's kind of just the way it is. It's really simplified, actually, which is actually pretty cool. Like, you know, I didn't really know it was that way. I always wondered how people turn pro in bodybuilding, but you just have to place really well at these shows, especially these national shows. But first, you have to qualify at the first regional show, you know. So NPC is just like just a step down from the IFBB, which is the pro league. And the thing with like the NPC and all that stuff like that is there's just so many divisions and competitors and everything like that too. So it's just like, it's a widely known, very popular organization. Now there's all kinds of other like federations and stuff like that, but those are just like not so much unheard of, but they don't get much coverage, you know?
Right. No, yeah, it did seem to me, just from a very much outsider, that the NPC was, again, one of the governing bodies. But again, that's amateur level, and then there's the pro level. Great. Awesome. So I remember when you, I think, posted after that show that you won, I was like, oh, how interesting it is to see Nathan, not just like the most jacked I've seen him, but spray tanned. But and because you're so white, Nathan. Like you're,
absolutely.
And I'm like, and that was part of your look in the pro wrestling world, right? And then I know that there's a technical reason for like the visuals and lights and all sorts of stuff, right? That's why you want the darker. Or maybe you tell me that's something I heard elsewhere. I don't know how true that is. But the purpose for the tanning so much, is it just for the visual element?
Very much so for the visual element. It's actually really crazy how it turns out, man. Like, obviously, like, I'm a super, super pale, pasty white man to the point where it's very hard to really see any type of lines. I mean, you can once I start like cutting body fat down, but it's really hard to like see anything just because I'm so pale.
Yeah, it's white on white. There's no contrast.
Yeah, exactly, especially with lighting too. But once I put the tan on and the way the stage lights hit you and how everything is set up, man, you will see every line, every striation from my upper chest to my shoulders to striations in my triceps. Like, it really brings out the fine detail that you spent endless weeks working towards. So a lot of people think, oh, well, you just get tanned up and put on underwear and that's it. But that tan literally does so much for you. It really truly brings out all the hard work that you were putting in. And I've grown up my entire life being in this white, right? I got that first taste of what an actual tan was, and holy shit, I could not believe it. I was literally like just hours on end just staring at myself in the mirror. I just could not believe the way I looked. I felt like a god, man. Because I'd been so pasty white for such a long time, and just seeing myself tan for the first time, like I was literally like absolutely like obsessed like with the way I looked. Like I couldn't stop taking pictures and stuff and posing in my camera and going through my posing routine and everything because I could not believe how I looked.
Well, that's the point, right? Again, pushing your body to that limit to where this is what a human body can look like. That's my fascination with the bodybuilding stuff, and the overlap in the wrestling world, of course, and a big Arnold fan, of course, just as pop culture goes. And so I've always been fascinated by it. And again, if I'm flipping through and I see it or see something online, I like it on Instagram or whatever. I've always been fascinated by it. But that, when I would see you in the wrestling world, it's like, man, it's a beefy kid, man. It's a beefy white boy. Jeez. And then I see you on the bodybuilding stage, and I'm like, oh, it's like Nathan like ate half of himself and then shrink wrapped the muscles. And like, I was like, dude, it looked great. I was like, where you could see like muscle fibers from like far away, like just big, but then just shrunk, and that shrink wrapped tightness, like you can visually see. I was like, that's impressive, even though I'd seen you up close and worked with you before, that. Yeah. It's like, that's another level of again, the dialing that in.
I've never been that shredded in my life. That's why it looks so different, because I've always been pretty beefy throughout the years. And
I love the terminology too, right? Because we know what we mean when you say beefy and I say shredded, and that you looked shredded for sure.
Absolutely, and I've never been that low in body fat before. So just to see myself and what I look like at that percentage of body fat was just pretty crazy, man.
Oh, man, to go from skinny video game nerd to that, man, that's pretty intense, man.
Yeah, I blame wrestling for getting me into all that.
Well, yeah, again, it's a lot of overlap in those worlds. Here's a random question. So it took me a minute, but I finally got around to it. I watched that Baby Yoda show. Dude, you were in love with Baby Yoda. Are you still?
Man, I am, but not to the extent to where I was. I feel like a lot of people just completely forgot about Baby Yoda, actually, Yeah. I have all kinds of, like, Baby Yoda stuff, man. Like, I got, like, a hoodie. My dad's wife actually got me a Yoda, like, metal piece welded into the shape of a Yoda, for Christmas this past year. So which is like, people know I still care about Baby Yoda, and he'll always still be my little child. But like that passion towards him is not as great as it was, just because it died out, man. Like, Baby Yoda was hot for like a whole 6 months. Like your feed was just filled with memes. There was merchandise everywhere.
No, I would see you in like a sweater with Baby Yoda on.
Yeah, and I still have that sweater. I still have it.
The sweater's dope, actually.
Yeah, it is. I love it, man. Doesn't fit anymore, but I still have it. But yeah, like that phase just like was pretty cool, and people really latched onto it, man. But now I just don't hear the popularity of it. As everything comes and goes.
I think they sold enough toys probably, and then they're gonna move on to something else. Who knows?
Yeah, people got their fix, and now people are talking about Twisted Tees. Like, Twisted Tees are the cool thing now. Like, things come and go like that.
Yeah,
I still care. I still have my passion for Baby Yoda, just not as much as I did.
Seriously, man, that's funny. And so this is the Writers and Fighters podcast. And so I talked to you because you had that experience in the fight world of pro wrestling. But do you or have you ever like been any sort of like writer or creative kind of person?
As far as creativity goes, I never really wrote anything, but I did play music when I was younger. I was in a couple of pop punk or punk rock or even metalcore bands throughout high school.
Really?
So I did. I played a little bit of music when I was in high school. I played bass guitar. Then I kind of got into like synth and keyboards also as well. So I played a little bit of guitar throughout my years in high school as well. So as far as like writing goes, I would like write little songs here and there, but they never really went anywhere. But I have a little like brief music background, if that counts as writing.
No, yeah, totally, 100% it does, man. Yeah, and then of course, the promos that you write on the fly, right? Then you're and stuff, so those always count.
That counts too, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah. So what do you have coming up, man, as we start winding this down? What do you got coming up? Where can people find you? What do you want to promote?
I got a lot coming up, actually. This year, I'm just trying to make up for everything that I didn't get to do last year, unfortunately. I'm trying to make the best of this year. As far as things I got coming up, I'm currently working towards competing again, which is going to be June 26th at the Branch Warren Classic in Houston. And I'm probably going to shoot for another show probably a couple weeks after that because I really want to hit – my goal this year is to place first in my class and hopefully take an overall win. That's one of my bigger goals. Another goal is to buy a new car, man, which is actually in the process of what I was doing before we hopped on this call too. So hopefully I can knock that out today, and I'll be off to a good start already.
Shit, man. But some trophies in a car, that'd be a good fucking year, man. Let's do it.
Yeah, man. If people want to follow my journey, I post religiously pretty frequently, actually, because I like to keep people updated and up the loop. You can find me on Instagram under GingerGains76. You can find me on Facebook under Nate Jolly. And then Twitter, I don't really use Twitter all that much, but those are my two main social media platforms where I like to keep people up to date and how they can reach me and how they can stay in contact with me, and also how they can just follow the journey that I'm on too as well.
No, yeah, again, I did that long ago when you were in the pro wrestling world, and then saw the transition, again, largely through just social media and touching base with you every once in a while here and there. So yeah, definitely everybody follow his stuff. I will put the links in the show notes or episode description and all that jazz, and you'll be able to keep up with Nathan. Well, all right, buddy. I appreciate you coming on. This is, again, one of my goals and endeavors I'm undertaking, and it is hard work and stuff. So I knew you would get it, and I appreciate you coming on board so we can help you promote your hard work as well, buddy.
Absolutely, man. Podcasts are a thing that I've always been very interested in, and I'm glad that I got to be on this. Like, you have no idea how far I was, like, looking forward to this, man. Like, I was at the dealership today just hoping I could get this shit wrapped up so that I could go home and record this podcast, man, because it's just, like, this is something that I've always wanted to do, and, like, you giving me the platform to tell people my story, like, just means the world to me. So it's an honor to be on this podcast. So I want to thank you for, like, allowing me to be on here, too. And I get to be one of your very few guests, so hopefully throughout this year when you do blow up and you get thousands of views and thousands of subscribers, just remember our first few guests that we had on here too.
Oh yeah, of course, man. Yeah, you got to open invite, man, to come back and plug all your shit. So good luck on that that show in the summer, and we're gonna be rooting for you, buddy. All right,
man. Thank you.
Take care. All right, y'all. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. You know, the beginning I talked a little bit about the UFC and the CTE issues, specifically with Max Holloway fighting in about a week. Then we had the interview, which I really hope you enjoyed, the interview with Nate Jolly. Good cat, right? Again, hard worker. Really cool to see him accomplished so much in the pro wrestling world, and then well on his way to accomplishing a lot in the bodybuilding world. Already placing, first place in his class at the NPC event he did. Another big event coming up this summer that we're wishing him well on. So hopefully you found some inspiration there, maybe had a laugh, maybe learned something that you weren't aware of before. Appreciate all your support. If you can hop on to Twitter and YouTube specifically and like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. In the next week or two, I'm going to have some more riders, more fighters. Exciting stuff coming up, y'all. So make sure you are following us everywhere so you keep up to date. Be good out there, and we'll talk next week.